Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today I have an SAT writing tip and trick for you that deals with dangling modifiers. If you don't know what a dangling modifier is, a dangling modifier occurs when you have an introductory modifying clause, such as far from marking the end of investigative journalism, and then obviously we have to follow that with a comma since it's at the beginning of a sentence, and then the subject that it's modifying, which needs to come after this comma, is not the correct subject. So in this case we have the option cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens. Now, if you read this passage, you would understand that the modifier here, it needs to modify the advent of the digital age. So C would have to be our correct answer, and I'll explain why. So in this passage, it talks about how far from marking the end of investigative journalism, the advent of the digital age, which it talks about being the introduction of technology in journalism, has actually increased the number of potential investigators by facilitating cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens. So then if I look at my other options as far as how I can be sure that C is correct, I know that option A, B, and D all have to be incorrect because they would have a dangling modifier. Now a dangling modifier, like I said, that's when what this introductory modifying clause, right, which I put in blue and we'll put circle it in green as well. A dangling modifier is when that introductory modifying clause isn't modifying what it should be. Okay, so we know in this case that far from marking the end of investigative journalism, that is not modifying cooperation among journalists, because we know that cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens, that's not what's far from marking the end of investigative journalism. So that would be a dangling modifier, okay? So that would be incorrect. Now, if we look at option B, the number of potential investigators, okay? Once again, far from marking the end of investigative journalism, that's not modifying the number of potential investigators. Now, I know that you obviously haven't read this passage, so this may seem like it's a little bit confusing. What I did here is I read the passage and I know that the advent of the digital age is what is responsible for being far from marking the end of investigative journalism. So it has to modify the advent of the digital age. Anything else that it would be modifying, such as by facilitating cooperation among journalists and ordinary citizens, would be incorrect. It would be a dangling modifier because it's not modifying what it's supposed to modify. Okay, so we know that this modifier up here, this far from marking the end of investigative journalism, has to modify only one thing, and that will be the advent of the digital age, because that is with a subject that it has to modify, and that's what has been talked about throughout this passage. So the correct answer there has to be C. So hopefully that SAT writing tip and trick was helpful. If it was, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We also have a 90-day SAT prep course available on our channel if you want to go find that. As always, make sure to have a good day.